Hello humans, here's a story. 3 frighteningly short and definitely very weird years ago, we started this channel with the intention of rebalancing the online conversation around effects in filmmaking. We wanted to demonstrate how old school, practical techniques combined with the latest technology can elevate effects work beyond blanket CG solutions. And as we take on bigger projects, we need the computing power to back it up. Which is why we were thrilled when AMD, manufacturers of the most powerful processors in the world, reached out to us to test their new Ryzen Threadripper 7970X processor. But hold up, we do everything in camera, right? Why would we need the latest and best processor on the market? Well, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that we believe in a hybrid approach to effects. So while we always start with capturing as much in camera as possible, compositing alone requires a huge amount of processing. And there's always so much that can be added and improved in post-production. Whether it's layering multiple motion control passes, handling 3D scan mesh data for prosthetics and model work, or motion tracking on-set footage for additional element compositing, we still need serious computing power to deliver high-grade effects work. And as cinema cameras continue to evolve and capture ever higher resolutions and data rates, the need for processing power is greater than ever. And what better way to test this wicked new setup than by revisiting some of our favourite and definitely most processor-heavy projects and conducting side-by-side tests with one of our old machines to see just how fast this thing is, while simultaneously demonstrating just how much faster we're going to be able to turn around our content for your ravenous eyeballs. So come on then. Okay, so JP, this is an exciting time for me. You've had this machine for some days, and you've obviously had some time to, put all the software on that we need, that we use, so that we can compare it with our older machine. And I think probably there's a couple of things we want to say to start off with, which is the hardware that we have in this new machine. Before we say that, I suppose maybe we sort of mention JP's sort of old machine, which I guess is about 10 years old at this point. And it's
at least
pretty much kind of, you got to the point where you'd upgraded it hardware-wise about as far as it'll go. And so this has actually come at a remarkably convenient time.
It has.
But you did sort of find, actually, your machine is still very powerful.
Yeah, so I mean, it served us very well for quite a few years, and yeah, it wasn't much of a slouch. It was still pretty good in terms of performance. It just literally reached the end of its expandability life, and very much at the end of where it could be improved in terms of upgrades and performance.
Yeah, cool. In terms of the beast, the new machine, what's in there?
So we have a machine with an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 7970X processor with 32 cores and 64 threads. And that's running at 4 gigahertz. And yeah, it's a beast. It's on average, it's about twice the performance of the older machine. Yeah, in terms of render speeds, encoding speeds, and just general speed in terms of being able to operate the software that we've been using.
Yeah.
The GPU is a AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX.
Okay.
Which
rolls off the tongue.
It rolls off the tongue. And this is a GPU or graphics card that is really tailored for the kind of work that we want to do.
Yeah.
It's super high performance in terms of its rendering abilities and its real-time capabilities.
Yeah, nice.
It's a really welcome upgrade, and it's a perfect kind of jumping off point actually for the projects that we plan to do in the near future. So numbers, I mean, if you wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of performance, if I just show you the Cinebench results.
Okay, yeah. So what's Cinebench? Let's just...
So Cinebench is a really good benchmark bit of software that will analyze your CPU and your GPU performance through giving it a render test, basically.
Right.
Or it gives it a few tasks to do in terms of visual rendering and processing. And at the end of it, it gives you basically a score.
Okay.
So yeah, we've got some really good numbers
I just looked at the numbers. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So very respectable, and obviously at the higher end in terms of what is its capabilities, not just for 3D rendering. I mean, this is a good example of how capable it is, obviously for 3D CG rendering. But it's also applicable to what we do, doing more of as well, which is integrating CG effects into our practical work. So this is a 4K test scene that's benchmarking our GPU to measure frames per second playback and processing.
Okay, so it's real-time rendering. It's building this scene and showing us as it's creating it. This isn't a video.
No.
This isn't a pre-rendered output, right?
Right. So this is a very good example of the capability and performance that we could have perhaps in Unreal Engine for virtual production. We've already kind of dabbled into that. I think that what an interesting opportunities that can offer certain projects where we can combine more practical approaches with virtual production perhaps would be quite exciting. So yeah, a lot of these online benchmark tests are really good to measure your workstation's performance in terms of graphics processing, display, frame rates, frames per second basically, which is very comparable to gamers and the frames per second speed that is...
More frames per second!
Yeah, they want a lot. And for us, what's great is that ability is also comparable to applications such as Unreal Engine, so for virtual production and for live visual display and processing. And we're very much at the ability now where we can push that further as a possibility for us to do. So some of these benchmark results here of the RX 7900 XTX GPU, you can see, you know, getting some really good scores, getting some really good frames per second of some quite intensive 4K scene tests.
108 frames per second at 4K. That's minimum, sorry. Okay, that's minimum. Maximum 216 frames a second at 4K.
Yeah. And this is out of the box performance as well.
Sure.
We can also do certain things to optimize those numbers and get them up. And we've already got to this realization where we can save so much time just on the tasks that we were doing. And what's really excited us, I think now, or me especially, is realizing how far we can now push to do more hybrid type examples. So where we can integrate more CG, where we can push things into real-time rendering, and hopefully produce some more fresh content.
Yeah, you know this, you lucky people. So you've queued up a number of projects so that we can sort of have a look and essentially, you know, what kind of speeds were we getting on the previous machine versus what we're getting with this new AMD machine. Where do we start?
So one of the most obvious kind of day-to-day tasks that we would do is just encoding video. So if I show you these results here.
Yeah, so you've got a batch list of exports set up there.
Yes, this is a kind of typical queue of clips that we would normally export.
And how big are these?
They're 2-minute clips each, 4K H.265s. And
we're converting them into H.265s from BRAW.
Correct, yeah. So we've basically got a speed, you know, doubling of our exporting speed. And again, that just saves a lot of time on its own. But this is also the kind of process that you can leave running whilst simultaneously working on another application.
Right.
So that's great. That's probably one of the more obvious kind of jumps in speed. Something bit more specific, like what we did recently, where we had a load of clips of our footage where we needed to denoise the footage.
Yeah, so this is when we shot the alien derelict miniature, and because it's a miniature, we had to really close down the iris.
We're pushing the camera to the limits.
Yeah, to get really deep depth of field, and then you need more light, and we were sort of limited with the amount of light that we had, and we wanted to shoot high frame rate, and so ultimately we were really pushing the camera in terms of its ISO as high as we could. And so it was introducing some noise, but we know that, well, certainly I always use Resolve. Their denoising is so good. But yeah, it's like so processor heavy, isn't it, denoising?
It is, yes. And there's no way around it, really, it taking a while. So on average, our clips were, again, kind of 2-minute takes. And so we were averaging on our older setup, denoising a 2-minute clip took around 57 minutes. which you don't realize can be sped up until you have a new machine. So we're averaging about 20, 21 minutes on the new one.
Wow.
And that's a noticeable increase that, you know, again, once you batch render a load of shots like that, the time that you save from that
Literally hours.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And again, it's a non-glamorous kind of very necessary, very common to denoise footage.
Yeah, well, I mean, cinema cameras don't have internal denoising. The sort of the more kind of consumer and prosumer cameras usually have internal denoising in them, but that kind of introduces, you know, artifacts, I suppose you could call them. And so generally speaking, a cinema camera won't have that, and you simply apply denoising in post. So it's absolutely something you just always need to do. And it is, it's a killer on your machine, but that is extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's again, the cumulative saving in time that gives you when you have a whole, as we did, a whole batch of shots that needed that treatment.
Yeah. And when we're rushing to get an episode out, and it's just like, oh God, this is taking so long.
Yes. And also, you know, it's a similar intensive process to retiming as well, because we also retimed these shots.
Yes.
And it's a very comparable kind of intensive kind of process that the machine would have to go through. And again, we had very, very similar results with our new machine. We had a clear jump in speed in terms of getting those shots processed.
So this is actually After Effects you're doing the denoising in. I know that's one of your go-tos for a lot of bits. So yeah, is there much difference between, because in my limited understanding, let's be clear, I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to computers. I do the filming. But I know that After Effects had a bit of an issue for the longest time whereby it didn't use all of your computer's capabilities, right? Whereas optimized. Resolve is more kind of optimized for GPU usage. But they've made that change, and now it can access the threads, is it?
It's the cores, yeah. You can do multi-core rendering now, which is great because it can access more of the available power of your machine, processing power to brute force through the rendering, basically. So it can help accelerate that.
Right.
There used to be more of a noticeable jump between softwares and different software and how they could capitalize on the specification of your machine. So some of them would have perhaps accelerated effects for the GPU to handle or the CPU to handle. And I think what we're seeing now is a really good point in time where software makers are realizing that people have machines, or it's more common now to have machines of this specification that can really capitalize on accelerating their effects and accelerating their render engines to actually harness some of this power that you have on the GPU and the CPU with its threads and cores and all that stuff. Yeah, software like After Effects is really good. It's obviously not fully optimized, but it's going in the right direction. And I think, like I said, I think it's hopefully more of a matter of time that more companies can capitalize on the speed of the GPU, for example. So, you know, Unreal Engine is a good example of where it's very capable of even doing real-time effects or near to real-time rendering. And I think that's just going to become more and more common with software such as this. Yeah. I think it's going to become more of a common occurrence that we see accelerated effects become more accessible in software packages like this. That again, hopefully will then save our time or creators' time in post-production.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. So a really good example of a project that was very processor intensive was when we were doing some motion control shots with a miniature Lancaster. And we were doing it as a shoot, move, shoot, motion controlled still sequence essentially. And so what we're dealing with is 25 meg still files, 25 of those per second. That's a lot of data. I always feel bad when you walk home with some of this stuff.
Well, that's the thing. Some of our most enjoyable episodes to make, it's been great because we've known that we've achieved a lot in camera.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But what comes with that is whatever we do, we then have to process that. Yeah. So if we're shooting a lot on the 6K or the 12K or even the 4K camera, we'll come away with a lot of data to kind of process to varying degrees. And especially with the motion control stuff, like you said, with shooting DSLR raw stills at averaging about 25 megabytes per frame, and there's 25 of them per second. It can add up to be quite a data-heavy ordeal. And definitely the workstation that we were on previously, where we did do the post on this episode, it was a slog.
Yeah.
A slog.
Yeah.
So if I show you just some examples of what we can now do, just in general, it's a lot snappier, it's a lot quicker to import these raw image sequences and for the workstation to process them. And then once we brought them in, we've got a noticeable increase in speed in terms of being able to process these image sequences and apply effects to them.
Yep.
So to key them out, do the basic lineup work that we'd initially do, which is get our selects. But usually that is derived by how quickly we can do a rough layout. And if your machine is struggling to even do that, which we were in the past, that also limits your creativity, because it very quickly becomes...
It's an ordeal.
An ordeal, yes. And it's such a refreshing change now to have such a powerful GPU and CPU that can really push through this this type of work, because it's so intensive computationally. And what's great is we can drag this in almost as if it's like normal footage.
Wow.
And get some really good, speedy, snappy results. But it's so nice to be able to work on it where you're not worrying about the machine freezing, hanging, crashing. It can take it. So that again opens up the prospect of doing more motion control work.
Yes.
With
you haven't got that little thing in the back of your mind going, oh God, oh God.
Exactly. So what this also allows us to do is do our lineup work where we put our multiple passes together and very quickly be able to judge them, see if it's the best take. And what's great is having sufficient amount of GPU power to do our render previews. And as we're doing that, we can flick through the layers and we can very quickly see our lineup.
And it's like that.
Yeah,
it's not even thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean it's almost as if it's regular camera footage.
Yeah,
it's uncompressed.
It's just removing the limitations that stunt creativity, basically, isn't it? Like when you can just review the shot. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're asking much, but with the density of these kind of files, it's like that is asking a lot, and to be able to have that, it's like cool. In a lame word. Okay, so we've done a bit of work with 3D scans, whether it's for prosthetics or miniature work and stuff like that, and we're working on a few things with that. But I know you were sort of saying how when you're working on like 3D prints or 3D scans, and there's only so far you could go with your old machine, and it basically just started crashing, right?
Yeah, and especially when then processing it further to do sculpting and manipulation with. But what we found with the new machine is we have a really good ability to take in some high-res mesh data and do post-processing on it.
Yeah, so this is a 3D scan of an actor from a movie that we're working on. And there was some sort of specific prosthetics that were required. And this is one awesome thing about this kind of technology is it just speeds up that whole process, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because you're not having to make full head casts and all that kind of stuff. You just scan the actor's face, resin print it, and then we were able to then have resin prints like on set where we can offer up a grayscale resin print of the face for lighting references, for lighting in post and all of that. But just looking at this, the detail, like all the pores. I mean, this is it's obviously a very high resolution 3D file.
And this is something that we just simply couldn't work on with our previous generation machine, because it was the data sets and just the sheer resolution of this type of scan. It would hang on our old machine, or it would freeze, and it wouldn't allow us to work anywhere near the speed that we can now. And the quality of this mesh is incredible.
It really
the
is.
detail.
It's an amazing scan.
We're talking kind of millions, millions of polygons and milligons.
Oh my word! When you take away that sort of surface render, just the sheer volume of
So it's a lot of data.
connections.
It's a lot of data to be processing, especially when you then go in and subdivide meshes for sculpting and for refining the detail and things like that. That's definitely what we can do now, and we're both really excited about kind of where we can push this in terms of, which we've touched on a little bit before with our previous work, where we go through some of the traditional processes to a certain extent, but are starting to think of new ways and fresh ways of applying that. So maybe taking a lot of these techniques and digitally applying some makeup in post, but still keeping a lot of the processes still traditional to get a mixture or a hybrid kind of result that can deliver more than perhaps traditional prosthetic work can do. And that's an exciting avenue that we can now pursue. What I found before with the previous machine that I was on is that it just didn't have that horsepower to display and manipulate that mesh once it had been subdivided.
When you say subdividing, what do you mean?
So that's increasing the resolution of a mesh. So it would increase the amount of points that can then be edited on a surface, which becomes particularly important when you want to digitally sculpt. Or add
super fine detail.
Exactly, And these scans already have some fantastic detail in them, but it was necessary for us to have, in this particular case, the ability to remove an eye and to sculpt in some detail behind that eye, because that was part of the purpose of the piece, was to act as the almost like negative prosthetic.
Something
you couldn't put on the film.
Without removing the person's eye, you can't do a negative space in prosthetics, right? Whereas
without hurting your actor.
There'd be some discomfort. But whereas in this case, you can do it. And create that.
And again, that was the whole point in kind of working out some interesting applications that cross that border between digital and practical, that took it perhaps to a newer place that we're excited with, which we can now do because we've got the processing power to do this work and to do it and again preview it in real time or next to real time, and really have that ability to not think about or not have to think about the process of doing the creative work.
Exactly, and just not worrying about those limits.
Exactly.
And just being able to get into that creative flow. And I think that's the thing as well. I mean, certainly for me as an editor, there's nothing more frustrating than when you're working on a machine that just can't achieve full playback, like 25 frames or 24.
It's such a simple thing, isn't it?
It's such a simple thing. But you literally cannot edit unless you're watching it at the correct speed.
And we're kind of spoilt, right? Because we're living in a time where 4K, 6K, 12K, which is what we alone have dealt with recently in terms of footage from cameras or renders. It's getting more common, and it's very easy to forget the power needed or the processing power needed to get that real-time playback just on its own, let alone adding effects to it.
And then you add effects and it's just like,
And what's great now is that, we've got that ability where we can do that, and it just speeds up the workflow to the point where we have saved sufficient amount of time on the post side to try different revisions, different ideas, more creative opportunities, because you've saved that time.
And you're not put off from trying it because of the sheer nightmare it's going to be in terms of working with it.
Well, for me, on a personal note, having dealt with the slower speeds of the older machine, I no longer feel daunted when we have had a day where we have shot a lot of video material and just knowing inherently there's going to be a long time processing that. And now it's kind of brought that joy back a little bit more.
That's great.
You can think more of the creative fun, that a project will bring. So we've got to a point now where it's actually really exciting, because the possibilities that we have now in terms of integrating things like virtual production, doing more perhaps motion control, integrating more kind of modern techniques perhaps with like we've always planned to do, right? Is show more bigger and better examples, things like CG, integrating them with more traditional practical based effects. And It's just been a joy so far to realise that you know, the power of this kind of setup is going to bring back a lot of the joy to what was quite a lot of pain.
Yeah. There it is. There's your summary. Increased joy, significant pain removal. Couldn't have put it better myself. Nice one, dude. Thank you for setting all this up and taking us through it all. Hope you enjoyed that. We're going to leave it there. If you're a creator, inventor, architect, or just someone like us using complex workflows, be sure to hit the link in the description or snap this QR code and check out AMD's new range of Threadripper Pro 7000 series processors and see how they can improve your workflow. Huge thanks to AMD for sending this wonderful beast our way and for enabling us to do bigger and better things. The rest is obvious, like, subscribe, etc. We do run a Patreon if you want to go there and support us so that we can keep doing more of this. And keep an eye out. Bigger, better things are on the way.